All right. Welcome everyone to our local author night for July. My name is Julie and I'm the events manager at Roundabout Books. And if you haven't been in lately, we are open currently 10 to 4 and then I believe 10 to 2 on Sundays, but we're going to be going back to 10 to 4. If you're not able to come into the store, but you still want a book, give us a call. We can leave it on the red bench out front. We've been open this whole time in varying capacities. So we're really excited to keep our events going in this virtual space. So tonight we're welcoming 3 local authors to speak about their books. How this is going to work is they each have 15 minutes to kind of talk about their book, explain why they wrote it, read any brief passages that they want, and then we will have questions at the end. So if you have questions for a specific author, hold on to them. You can type them into the chat, or we will do, I'll unmute you at the end so that you can talk. And this is going up on YouTube later, so if you know anyone who wasn't able to make it tonight, please let them know they can check the Roundabout Books channel on YouTube. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Jack Wills tonight. So Jack, you're already unmuted, but real quick, I'm just going to read a small thing from our website about your book. So A Land Divided by Jack Wills. In January 2016, the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge headquarters in Oregon is seized and occupied by angry ranchers and armed militants. Tension develops between the occupiers and law enforcement, and the citizens of Harney County find themselves in a land divided, those in favor of the occupation and those opposed. So I'm sure most of us know about this, but I don't want to give Jack's book away or say anything more than what he has. So Jack, I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to you and tell us about your book.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Appreciate you organizing this and having this opportunity. Also like to thank some of my friends and family and long ago friends to join me here. That's very much appreciated. I honestly, I thought I was going to go last, so I think probably some people are going to miss this, but so be it. It'll be on YouTube, right? Is that what I heard? So I am the author of A Land Divided. I'm also a nature photographer, which I think has been kind of significant in the development of this book. What I thought about as I was working on this presentation is that this has been a journey, and it is a journey that obviously was a part of the last 3 years, last 2.5, 3 years of writing the book, editing the book, and publishing the book. But it's also a journey that began many, many years ago. And in explaining that, it's in writing a novel, for me, there are 3 basic ingredients in terms of gathering the information. One of those ingredients is research. You need to do some research to kind of support what you're writing. Another one is experience, which I think is very important. And the third one is imagination. You put those 3 things together and you come up with what you need to write a novel. So with that said, a lot of what I think it's important for me to talk about now is experience. So I grew up in Paris. That's Paris, Missouri, by the way, not Paris, France. And it's a small town. When I was there, it was about 1,400 population. Burns, which is a central location for the novel that I've written, is about 2,700. So I do believe that my time in living in Paris actually prepared me somewhat for understanding the issues in Burns, Oregon, during the occupation. It also, as a part of that, was the farm life. So we owned a farm that was about 2 miles out of town on a gravel road, and I was significantly responsible for doing things on the farm, including plowing, disking, driving the tractor, obviously, planting, harvesting, and animal husbandry. So this is a beginning of the journey. So it's central to getting a kind of a sense of how I went from that to writing. It began probably with my mother deciding that in consultation with another relative that I was spending too much time running around the yard playing cowboys. So she decided to take me by the ear, figuratively, of course, to the library to check out some books. And truly, I resisted with every fiber of my body, but I went. And brought home 3 books. Guess what the subject matter was? Westerns. At any rate, one of those books was Riders of the Purple Sage by Zane Grey. Really, obviously became very much absorbed by that book. So much so that the third time that I was told that 1 o'clock was too late for people to stay up who were 12 years old reading books, that I'd better go to bed. And they spent quite a bit of time helping me develop a schedule so I didn't use all of my time reading books, which I probably would have at that point. Since then, I've read several books that I think were influential just in terms of not just story, not just characters, but also the fact that human relationships, human issues, etc., such as Moby Dick, believe it or not, Last of the Mohicans, Mutiny on the Bounty trilogy. Also read War and Peace later, but that was actually a pretty good book. As a part of that, that extends into my time in the Navy. I went to college briefly. We call it a skirmish in college. It really wasn't very successful. I wasn't interested in accounting, which is what I was majoring in at the time. So I had a good time, but I ended up facing either being on the ground in Vietnam or on a ship, but I chose a ship. So on the ship, we had opportunities to read books. One of the books that I chose was The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. In my opinion, it was a great book. It was extremely fascinating and gave me some insights into human behavior and into philosophy. A little sidebar, I was reading C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves one night, and I asked the guy next to me what he was reading. It was Conan the Barbarian. Well, at any rate, I think there's a place for Conan, and I think a little bit later I actually did read one of the books on Conan, just to see what it was like. It was entertaining. But C.S. Lewis's book really influenced me and stimulated me in terms of thinking about how writing can influence people, how writing can help to expand consciousness and awareness. So I sort of in a rudimentary way decided that I wanted to write. But writing novels, English even, just really wasn't very practical. In my family, I knew I wouldn't get much support for that sort of thing. So I chose journalism. I actually got a degree in journalism at the University of Missouri and went on to about 2.5, 3 years of working in journalism, and during that time realized it really wasn't what I wanted to do. So I traveled out to the Northwest, which I'd become quite fond of, all the way cross country from South Carolina, become quite fond of the Northwest because I had a little time in the Navy here and really enjoyed the environment. Great place to spend time in nature. So that's probably where things go from there. Let me read a little bit to you here. And the background on what I'm going to read is that Shawn Bryant, the protagonist in my story, is having quite a few emotional issues at this point in time. Very confused, stressed, and uncertain. So he decided to go for a walk. He went for a walk, interestingly enough. I put him there, of course, but he went for a walk on a trail that was not far from where a good buddy of mine camped when we were taking our annual trip to Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. So here he goes. It had been several weeks since Shawn had used his body like this. He climbed the primitive fly fishing path that led up over rocks and twisted to negotiate the river. He didn't realize how much he had missed the exertion. His legs began to feel the demand of the elevation gain when the main trail transitioned into a scramble. After 2 miles, as the river began to be constricted between the walls of the canyon, Shawn crossed a few creeks that fed the river, mostly frozen, but he carefully stepped on rocks to avoid breaking through the ice into the frigid water. The brush became thicker and interfered with rapid ascent through the canyon. The canyon had cut its way through the basalt rocks and was filled with boulders, each attempting to block his way like giant sentinels. Shawn had a half smile as he struggled alongside the river. He felt more alive than he had for a long while. He began to reflect on the incredible value this wild place represented. It was not a value of money, but a value of spirit, a value of joy. It met a deep, deep need for him. His mind seemed to be sharper than it had been in the last few weeks. Problems seemed to be more manageable, even though they were not solved. His reverie was short-lived. Okay. I'll head back to what we're talking about here. So a lot of that was influenced by my backpacking in various places, and the Cascade Mountains, the Strawberries, the Ochocos, the Wallowas, the Rogue River Valley, and even Hell's Canyon that I've backpacked alone, oftentimes, or even with my dog Nick at the time, occasionally with other people. Photography, which is also included as a part of the novel, I think an important part of the novel. I have become an avid landscape photographer, but more importantly, a wildlife photographer. So that takes me back to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. But I've also been to Yellowstone, Everglades, Tetons, and more locally, Smith Rock State Park, where I shot a lot of eagle photographs. But the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge was certainly a definite part of that, my 20 annual trips with my buddy. So novel writing. Well, I've attempted several novels. The bones of previous attempts are lying around in dusty notebooks here and there in my attic, etc. And I may retrieve them. I may pull them out now that I've actually written one. So who knows? We'll see. Why was I successful this time? Well, part of it was I retired. About 40 years ago, along that 35 to 40 years ago, I got a master's in psychology. That started out as just an attempt to learn more about human behavior. And in the back of my mind, I thought, well, maybe someday that'll benefit me writing a novel. Who knows? But I got caught up in mental health and actually really enjoyed it. And I retired from my private practice in Eugene about 4 years ago. So retirement time, in other words, support from my life partner. She offered me space and time to accomplish my goals, which was very important because we have a lot of work to do. Restriction or confinement. Confinement is kind of important for me because I can find ways to distract myself from things that I should be doing. The early part of the book, I needed confinement. So, the middle part, end part of the book, it was no problem. I really enjoyed it. So I just stayed with it, stayed with the writing. That was great. So why this novel? For the past several years, I've traveled to that location, like I said, with my good buddy, and we would do birding, I call it, looking at bird life and other wildlife and photographing, and developed some skills with photography. Really enjoyed that. But much of that was in the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. I have developed a strong appreciation of wildlife, and I'm seriously concerned about the possibility of a sixth extinction due to human expansion and destruction of habitat. So in January, when I learned of the occupation of the refuge headquarters by a group of disaffected ranchers and regional militants, it had a profound effect on me emotionally. In fact, one of the characters of the novel, if you've read the novel, you may remember him. His name is George Henry. Represents a slightly exaggerated me. He's changed in a lot of different ways, but he does represent some of my emotional response to that. So let me just read briefly something from that. His name is George Henry. Henry, as I said, Jill is his wife. I'll skip the part on the history lesson there. George Henry clenched and unclenched his large, bony fist. Watching the evening news in his hillside home in Portland, Oregon was painful for him. His dark eyebrows furrowed as he stared at the report being delivered on his beloved Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. When they announced that no attempt had been made to stop the occupation, he pounded his fist so loudly on his recliner that his wife jumped. God, George, you're out of control, Jill said with irritation. You need to get a grip. I'm not going to get a grip unless it's around the red neck of one of those occupiers, Henry argued. They have no right to take over the refuge. Who the hell do they think they are? There's nothing you can do about it, so why worry about it, Jill countered. Henry paused and stared at the television, not really seeing the screen. His jaw tensed in his long, narrow face. After a few seconds, he brightened some and said, maybe there is something I can do about it. He raised his long frame from the chair and that was set a few feet from the wall of the great room and stretched. Those sons of bitches are protesting. Maybe I can protest them. He adjusted his wireframe glasses and sat back down. Okay, so we'll continue here. So the goals for me writing this novel, one, it's a bucket list thing. I wanted to write a novel. So it just so happened that this subject meant a lot to me. So it was also a cathartic experience in writing the novel. It wasn't just writing. I experienced an emotional release as I did this. So it was also an expanded awareness thing. I don't know that I knew that at the time, but it was an expanded awareness event for me, and I hope it is for the reader, because there are a lot of complex issues, controversial issues surrounding the occupation. In summary, the novel is about significant issues that emerged from the festering discontent from ranchers and regional militants as adversaries to federal law associated with the environmental movement. It's also about the lives of the people in the region who are impacted by this conflict. It can also be seen as a reflection, I think, of the larger human experience currently fermenting in our nation. In general, I will have accomplished my goal in writing this novel if the reader is entertained by the characters, the plot, while at the same time experiencing some expanded awareness of the issues involved and the situations that confront the characters of the novel. During a youthful exuberance, I once said that I wanted to write a great American novel. That was a long time ago. Well, I can assure you, this is an American novel. Thank you.
Oh, that was great, Jack. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think writing about something that probably hits home to a lot of Oregonians just because we remember it, but also diving deep into, you know, fictionalizing it and therefore maybe being able to get into the mind of people we wouldn't normally. So thank you for that explanation of your book, A Land Divided.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So we are going to move on to Erica Neiden and her book, Soldier On. So hold on just one second. Erica, let's unmute you. And let's see here. Okay. So let's see here. I'm just going to read a little bit of the description and then hand it over to you. So let's see here. Just weeks after the Nazis begin their brutal air attack on London, 21-year-old nurse Olivia Talbot is sent to remote Cornwall to care for the blind and embittered Major William Morgan, a former prisoner of war. Major Morgan challenges Olivia's innate bedside manner with harsh words and ingratitude, but she persists. Her tenacity and courage force him to reckon with his demons and awaken his will to live. Against the backdrop of peaceful Keldor, the Major's family estate, a budding friendship blossoms into an unexpected romance. And I'm going to leave off there and let you pick it up and tell us about Soldier On.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, Julie, and thank you, Roundabout Books, and friends and family, and everybody else who's here. And I keep getting texts, so sorry, they're beeping in. Anyway, Soldier On is my first book published, And, but I've been writing since I was little. When I was in elementary school, I used to write poetry about stuffed animals. Sometimes I would write about things I liked, like General Hospital, which was my favorite show when I was in elementary school, which is funny. But in junior high, I would write fan fiction. And I wrote a story once that I was the daughter of Indiana Jones and got to travel around the world with him during his archaeological digs, and sometimes get to meet famous rock stars who were making videos and things like that. And then in high school, I wrote with girlfriends, and we wrote in a spiral notebook, and every day we would trade notebooks back and forth, and it was so fun reading what they got to write. So I think being a writer takes a lot of imagination. I feel as though I have a good imagination, maybe too good of an imagination. I love to people watch and come up with stories about people that I have no idea about their lives. But in 2011, my mother-in-law suffered from Alzheimer's disease, and my husband, sorry. Okay. My husband and I were visiting her, and there were so many untold stories there at that place. And I apologize. I practiced so much today, and this didn't happen at all. Anyway, the time period that they set inside the care facility really reached back to the 1940s. Casablanca was on, music was on, and it was the seed that started this book for me, started this idea to write. And anyway, so I thought, you know what, maybe I'll write again and take it more seriously this time, which I started to do. And I love historical fiction, so I wanted the story to take place in history, of course. And I love England. I'm mildly obsessed. I know my friends would say I'm really obsessed, but, and I wanted the story to take place in Cornwall. And I've been able to visit Cornwall twice in my life, and I really look forward to going back there. The coastline is turquoise. It's dotted with little fishing villages. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And to me, characters are they're very important to the story, of course, but a setting is just as important as characters to me. And I felt like if I wrote about Cornwall, I could visit that place in my mind as I wrote, which I got to do. I have two main characters, as you mentioned, Olivia Talbot. And she's a nurse young nurse who leaves London to go to Cornwall to take care of Major Morgan. And writing from her perspective was so enjoyable because, again, I got to use my imagination and create her life before you even meet her. So her relationship with her family, her especially the one she has with her mother, and the special one she has with her dad. I got ideas from people that I know, stories that I've heard throughout my life. So writing from her perspective was very fun. I also wrote from William's perspective, and I'd never written for a man before, or from a man's perspective before. Also, he's blind, so it was a fun challenge to write from his point of view. I really enjoyed that. It took me 1 year to write my first version of the manuscript, and it took 6 more years of editing, revising, passing out to beta readers to see, does this work? What do I need? The feedback was so good, and I learned so much through the process. I also did a lot of research with nonfiction, of course, but also a lot of World War II fiction. And I enjoyed every minute of it. I also, when I write and revise and edit, I listen to an internet radio station called UK 1940s Radio, which would play music, and it would have actual news broadcasts from the time period. So I could hear Winston Churchill, and I could hear the Queen, and then they would talk about, you'd hear the sound of the alarms and things like that happening, and it just put me right in the moment, and I loved that. After 6 years, actually now after 7 years, total. I thought I was close to being finished, and I was looking for an editor, and I found one. She lives in Texas. Her name's Lisa, and she's marvelous. She's also a writing coach, and she taught me so much about truly showing your story, showing what your characters do, how they think, how they feel, versus telling. And she also helped me cut a ton of flowery language, which I had a lot of. But Soldier On is a story of finding true love during the time of war and how great things can be born from tragic events. It's about resilience and the beauty of still having hope when things can't get any worse. So I chose to read the first scene in chapter 7, and I'm going to read that to you now. And it's a time where William and Olivia are kind of becoming friends, okay? "How's the weather looking this morning, Polly?" William asked. Full from breakfast, he turned to the sitting room window as if he could see out of it. "It's raining and blowing, has been since I woke this morning. Not as hard now, I reckon, but wet just the same." "Excellent, I'd like a walk. Nurse Talbot, you'll accompany me?" "Of course." Her voice lacked the zest he was used to. "Unless you'd like the rain to let up before venturing out, I'm happy to wait. Not long ago, I would have given anything for a walk on our rain-soaked property. Come, we'll have an adventure. Jasper will love it." A short descent down the kitchen steps landed the pair in the southeast garden. Over the clamor of the rain, Keldor's chickens clucked about their coop. William recalled the vegetable plots dotting the grassy meadow and the surrounding stone walls and wooden gates. At one time, this area was the picture of perfection, a painter's paradise, and a gardener's as well. It certainly had given his mother joy. Though many had cared for it after her death, her presence still here reigned. "This reminds me of my grandmother's garden," Nurse Talbot said, "but hers isn't this big. My mother had full charge of her garden. She planted, harvested, and kept up the maintenance in between, even pulling weeds. My father told me she found gardening relaxing." He kept one hand swinging his cane and one wrapped around Nurse Talbot's arm. Thanks to his practice and her patience, walking together had developed into a sort of dance where each partner instinctively knew when it was their turn to step. "I'm glad my father kept things running after she died," he continued, "with help, of course." Keldor had been known for its gardens. His grandmother's roses had been famous all over the country, but that wasn't why his father kept them going. It was for William's mother. Keldor's gardens were forever enshrined in her loving memory. The restless air sent a chill across his shoulders. Harder rain followed. He shouted over the kerfuffle of tree branches and dead leaves, "Take us to the glass house." He lifted his white cane and moved his hand down Nurse Talbot's arm until it locked onto hers. Trusting her lead, he kept pace as they rounded raised beds and garden sculptures. He caught fragments of her laughter as the rain blew at them head on. "We made it," she announced, slowing her steps and then stopping altogether. William's shoulder slammed into hers, and they crashed into the wooden door. He was about to apologize, but she was still laughing. He chuckled as well, wiping his matted hair back from his forehead. "An adventure, see?" The doorknob squeaked, but neither she nor the door moved. Olivia grumbled. "Hang on." He lifted his left arm and thrust the door open. Inside, the rain echoed as it pounded the glass panes above their heads. The wind whined through tiny chinks like curlews during breeding season. The damp, earthy smell again conjured his mother. He waved left. "She started herbs on this side." Though the space felt cavernous, it was easy to picture the fragrant greens that had once crowded it from floor to ceiling. He gestured right, where at one time succulents, orchids, and a variety of palms had held sway. "Her tropical plants grew up front here." Nurse Talbot was quiet. Perhaps she had no interest in plants, or perhaps the place was so gloomy she was having a hard time picturing what he described. Best to change the subject. "1 year ago today, Nurse Talbot, what were you doing?" "From today? I have no idea." "Okay then, close to a year ago. Where were you? What was your life like during the war's infancy?" "Let me think." Despite the rain's hammering, her voice rang clear as though she stood close. "I had been at St. Mary Abbott's Hospital for 2 months. I lived on site and my hours were long. My biggest worry was whether I'd see my family at Christmas." "And did you see your family at Christmas?" "I got away for 2 days. We were all together except for John. He was unable to get leave. I don't suppose Christmas will ever be like it was before the war." He agreed, though he didn't say so. He liked hearing her talk about her family and hoped she didn't find the subject too painful. "What were you doing a year ago?" she asked. "Me? I was conducting combat training north of here." He lowered his head. "Sometimes I feel this war has already lasted a decade, to think it's only been over a year." "When did you get to North Africa?" This was unexpected. "Not until May. I was in Norway before that." "And what was your assignment there?" The patter of rain muted his courageous inhalation. In North Africa, to gather information, years before the war, I'd trained the Egyptians on how to strengthen their army whilst keeping watch over the Suez. When the war started, Egypt remained neutral. We still had plenty of people there, but rumors of Italy joining the Nazis began to surface. A friend of mine in Cairo, a man I'd met in 37, knew people. So because of our friendship and his connection, I went back. Not as an officer, mind you, but sort of a spy, I suppose. He scratched his upper lip, ready to talk about something else. You know, I wish I had a cigarette. You don't have one, do you? Sorry, I don't smoke. My father's convinced they're deadly. He frowned. Do you see drawers over that way? He pointed down to what he remembered to be the narrow walkway. I do. Would you look through them for me? Perhaps the bottom one? There still may be a packed shove in the back somewhere. Several bumps and knocks said she was struggling with the drawer as she had the glass house door. Before he had a chance to assist, he heard it slide open. You hid smoking from your father? She asked. When I was 15, yes. Did you find them? You really want one of these? Why not? And you'll join me? I might if they weren't 20 years old. There's no harm in old tobacco. He accepted the cigarette she placed between his fingers. He put it in his mouth and waited, a scratch followed by a weak sputter. She said the second fizzled almost as quickly as the first. I think you're out of luck. These matches are too damp. Finally, the tang of sulfur reached his nostrils. Got it, sir. Here's your light. He took a drag. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a cigarette. His father preferred a pipe, but William enjoyed cigarettes, mainly in social settings, like parties or in pubs. The girls he knew liked to smoke. Was the last time he smoked in London then, with Clementine, the night before he left for North Africa? He held the smoke in his lungs. Visions of a pretty face dissolved into darkness. All he smelled was burning tobacco. All he felt was pain. He exhaled and dropped the cigarette. You were right. These aren't very good. In fact, that was positively dreadful. He opened his mouth and stuck his tongue out as if the air would strip away the foul taste. And that's what I have for you guys. Sorry for all the tears.
No, that was great. I think it's really great to see that an author used personal inspiration to write a book, because it shows that you really, put your heart into the subject of your book.
Yeah, thanks. And I think part of it too is a lot of people who are on here right now are my friends and family. And one thing about this COVID business is that I have relatives and family all on the East Coast and some up in Washington, and they get to be here.
I know.
Right now.
So. Yeah, this is a great turnout as well. So thank you everybody for being here. Let's go ahead and talk about our last book, Michelle Davis. And Michelle, I'm going to mute you, I think. Are you already, wait, there we go.
Okay, hi.
I swear I've done this before. It should be getting easier. So Michelle's book, Learning to Bend, this is the short description, and of course I love it because it is set in Bend. Jenna Moore's flawlessly orchestrated life and engagement to Ben Kelly, the perfect man, vanish when she discovers a controlling side of her fiancé. Confused and unsure of who she is without Ben, Jenna decides to uproot from her safe, predictable life in Boston and move to Bend, Oregon, hoping to find her answers there. It's when she meets Jackson, a former Navy SEAL who battles demons of her own, that Jenna acquires the courage to let go of being perfect and embrace uncomfortable risks, transforming her life through forgiveness, compassion, surrender, and acceptance. And I'm going to turn it over to you to explain more about your book.
Thank you, Julie, and thanks to Roundabout Books as well. Erica and Jack, I really enjoyed hearing about your books and look forward to reading them in the near future. Learning to Bend is my first book, and it kind of happened in a very strange roundabout way. But before I get into that, I'll just expand a little bit about the story that Julie shared a bit earlier. In this book, it's a bit of a romance, but it's also like coming to age for a woman to realize who she is and how she was jolted out of her complacency when she saw this controlling side of Ben, her fiance. And she lived a really perfect life. Everything happened because she worked really hard. And as a result, it looked great on paper, but she was never, when she realized what was happening, she wasn't happy. And she knew she was missing something, and this is partly her quest to try to find what she's missing. In the process of ending her engagement, she reaches out to her best friend, Liv, who just moved to Bend the year prior, and Liv convinces her to move to visit over the spring break. Jenna's a teacher. So she goes out, and just like I did the first time I came here, she's in awe of the place. She's taken by the people, by the scenery, by the opportunities to really enjoy nature, enjoy life. And she's very impacted, but yet she's not willing to take that step, that risk. Everything's so safe and comfortable in Boston. She just decides she wants to stay there. She'll find another job, and she'll figure it out. But her friend calls her out on it. And there's a quote that I thought was pretty relevant to not just Jenna, but to a lot of us. And Liv says to her, "You wouldn't be running away. If anything, you'd be running toward. How else can you discover what's out there if you never leave your safe haven? Think all you want, but if you're ever going to change anything in your life, you have to be willing to take a chance and move forward. Staying in Boston and finding another teaching job is fine if you want to continue on the same path, but I sense you want something bigger." And she does. And this is the beginning of her quest. And when she gets to Bend, nothing's easy. She can't find a job. She can't find a space to stay. And she's really being challenged. So this book was written, I wrote the book in first person, but from two point of views, Jenna's and Jackson's. And most of them go back and forth. It's not totally one chapter than the next, but it's pretty much that way. And Jackson's a former Navy SEAL who had a really tough last mission that he commanded. And in the process, one of his men stepped on a landmine and had his legs blown off. And he witnessed that. And he holds that very deeply to him and blames himself for not protecting. So he has a lot to overcome as well. And in the midst of both of them struggling to figure out who they are, they meet. And there's a chemistry, of course, because there's partly romance, but it also shows how they grow together as a couple, but also continue their quest as individuals in a parallel way where they support one another but don't need one another. So that's a piece of the whole story. Jenna, there's some themes. She struggles with perfectionism. She doesn't like to do anything she's not good at. She's horrible at mountain biking, and Jackson has a mountain biking shop. That's what he has in Bend. So you read about how she struggles to try the trails and how she falls, and she, constantly is beating herself up. She struggles with running. She loves to run, but she overdoes it, and she's always trying to be better, go farther. And she keeps hitting roadblocks. And finally, realizes she can't bend, literally and figuratively. Her friend Liv drags her to a yoga class, and she's the worst person in the class and falls over on some guy's mat. And I totally relate because I struggle still to this day to touch the ground. But by embracing something that's very difficult for her, she begins her healing process. Likewise for Jackson, he also must learn to trust in himself again and also let in other people. And those are some of the ways that they come together in the book. Writing is not in my background. I have a very strange route. I know Jack talked about experience, and maybe I call my ADD career path. That may have given me a variety of skills that maybe helped me along the way of writing. But I was a finance major in college and worked in banking and really did not like it. Went back and got my master's in elementary ed and taught for a while. Loved teaching, taught at the college level. It was so much fun. And ironically, I thought that because math was my best subject growing up, which is why I chose a business major. As much as I like teaching math, I love teaching writing and doing writing workshops with my kids. And at the time, I didn't realize how important it was to me, and I kind of did it in a little bit of an unconventional way, but I think it took away a lot of the rules, and it was much more free-flowing than right now education has become. So I'm dating myself. But from there, I had kids and then got very involved with community volunteering and did some consulting with organizational consulting with businesses, and then did college admissions consulting. But I was still searching, and my youngest was getting ready to go to college, and it was just that transition phase of my life. And I was at a book club meeting, and the book we were reading was written by a local author. At the time, I was in Pennsylvania, and Amy Impellizzeri, who's written Lemongrass Hope, The Secret of Worry Dolls, The Truth According to Thea, a ton of books. And in the process, she shared that she was offering a writer's workshop for adults. And I thought, you know what? I could do that because I haven't had a writing class since my freshman year in college, and that really wasn't one of my best classes. And since I was working with high school students, helping them with college admissions, essays are a big part. So I thought, you know, this could really help me with what I'm doing right now. So I signed up, and I ended up being the only person in the workshop, and she didn't cancel it. So Amy got me writing. First, she had me doing lots of short things about opinions and personal blogging. And she was trying to encourage me to publish that. And I was like, there is no way I'm sharing my thoughts with people. That's just not happening. Then she convinced me that I could do it professionally. So I started blogging about college admissions ideas. And that was easy because it didn't involve here. It didn't involve the heart. But then through this process is when my husband and I started to move out to Bend. I became enamored with this town, and I would come back and tell her about it. And she's like, well, let's write about that. So we wrote a scene that takes place in the book or I wrote a scene where Jenna first sees Jackson at Mount Bachelor. And that became the start of this book. So slowly it developed into a novel. Meanwhile, then I continued blogging, and then I started to get the courage to start putting my real thoughts and opinions out there. And I have found that the combination of blogging and working on novels is a nice duo, because you can when you're writing a novel, you spend maybe the first 8 months, whatever, 2 months, however long it takes you to do the first draft, and then you're in revision form and you kind of lose your creativity. Whereas when you're constantly also blogging, it keeps it fresh. So I do like the balance of the two. But so I started writing the book, and it took, about 3 months to write the first draft. And I remember I finished it and I sat at the table and cried, and I thought I was done. And then I realized how bad it was and how much I had to change about it. I had to kill characters. And that's really hard to do because you get your heart and soul. You think these characters are real people. They become such a part of your life. It's like they're sitting next to you. But I worked with some beta readers, and I was getting some interesting feedback. And at the time I had written in third person, and the one person who read it suggested I turn it into a first person. So that was quite a feat to go from a third person to first person point of view with revising. And eventually I worked with an editor, Kirsten March, and she was fabulous, gave me some really good feedback. And then I decided, let's do it. Let's go publish it. So I self-published, worked locally with Andrew Cooper, who did a really fun video of a trailer for the book, because one of the hardest things I think for me was to promote it. That was one of the biggest challenges. So that's a little bit about how I got there. And I have two passages to read, one from Jenna's point of view and one from Jackson's. And I also have to tell you, I had all my notes and I totally went off script. So I apologize if I was a little bit not as organized as I'd originally planned. I hear Ben's car pull up in front of the townhouse, and instantly my stomach clenches, forming tight knots expanding from my pelvis to my chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. Ben opens the door. Sam greets him. I remain frozen on the floor. Hey, Jenna, how was your day? Ben says lightheartedly as he walks into the living room. I can see him through the open office doors. He appears normal like Ben. Could I have imagined everything? Was it all in my head? But it's not. The manila file folder, still open on the desk, holds all the proof. I stare. It's the only thing I can do. Ben's startled when he sees me sitting on the floor of his office, huddled against the wall. What's wrong? Did something happen? I try to speak, but no words form. Honey, he quickly moves towards me. But as he bends down and attempts to take me in his arms, I flinch, recoiling away from his touch. I see the obvious hurt in his eyes. He has no clue what's wrong. Jenna, talk to me. Tell me what's going on. Ben's visibly freaked out by my behavior. I take the deepest breath I can muster, allow the air to dissipate into my lungs, and slowly exhale. I know about the house you bought next to Catherine and Henry's. Feeling the heat rise in my chest, I tell myself to remain calm and listen. Ben must have a reasonable explanation. But that was supposed to be a surprise, Ben says, looking disappointed as if I've ruined some grand plan of his. How did you find out? His eyes then move to the open file on the desk. You never asked me, I say, my voice cracks, sounding wounded and deflated. He doesn't respond. In fact, Ben seems confused by my reaction. How could you buy the house? Where did you get the money? And why would you ever do this without me? With each question, my voice gains momentum. Ben calmly looks me in the eye. Jenna, this was my wedding present to you, he sighs. I guess it's no longer a surprise. A wedding present? Ben, this is a major deal. Where we live is something we both need to decide. You should have asked me. You understand that, don't you? I stand up to better make my point. Ben takes a deep breath and loudly exhales. I thought it would make you happy. Make me happy? The house sits next to Catherine and Henry's estate. Why would I want to live there? And it has 5 bedrooms, 5, and a 3-car garage. We only have 2 cars, I practically yell, even though he's now standing less than a foot away from me. Both my tone and my bold statements seem to upset Ben, but I don't care. My cheeks flush with rage. And then I see that in his eyes, those baby blue eyes I love, I'd really hurt him. That wasn't my intention, but he needs to know we can't function this way. Married couples tackle life situations together. They talk about things. So I sit down on the love seat, cross my arms across my chest, and tuck my legs underneath me. Limbs close to my body, I feel safe, more protected, ready to spring, perhaps even better prepared for what my fiancé is about to say. So that's where Jenna is at and why she starts her realization she must leave that relationship. And this is a little bit about Jackson. 22, 23, 24, one more. I think to myself, straining to finish the final pull-up. 25, done. I then grab a 35-pound kettlebell and begin the first of 3 sets of 20 swings. The clock on my nightstand says 4:41. I spend the next half hour hammering my muscles with weights, knowing that it is not the end of my morning workout. I still have a run. Welcome to my world. This is my daily practice, my religion. It's the only stable aspect of my life, but I need it, I crave it actually. It's what helps me counter the nightmares and the pain. It's been over a year now. My 34-year-old body hasn't physically changed since I left the SEALs at 6'2". Discipline and hard work have kept me at a steady weight of 197 pounds. In fact, my only variance from the years of following the SEALs strict code is that I grew out my hair. Now it's at my shoulders. I think letting it grow was symbolic at first, representing a departure from my former life as a Navy commander. Yeah, those were the best years of my life. I loved what I did, and my guys were freaking awesome, totally dependable and loyal as dogs. But afterwards, it was impossible to stay. I couldn't trust myself. So that's a little bit about learning to bend. That is not me. I can't touch the floor, but I'm getting closer. So thanks.
That was great. Yeah, I love your cover. I think it's really easy to pick out, in our local author section. So we're going to go ahead and open it up to any questions. So If anyone does have a question, if you want to put it in the group chat, or if you're on video with us, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. I just want to remind everyone, these books are for sale at our bookstore. The phone number is 541-306-6564. So just give us a call. You can put one on hold. If we do happen to run out, you know, still order them and we'll get in touch with these authors and get more copies, because we love having local authors' books on our shelves. So let's see here. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat just yet. Actually, hold on. I'm going to, let me unmute you, our authors. Actually, Erica, I'll ask a question of you. So you said you had, you know, you used some beta readers, and have you done much with the Central Oregon, you know, Writers Guild? Are you finding that there's local help with that for people who might be interested in this area in writing a book?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. I've been a member of the Guild, I think, for about 4 or 5 years, and it's wonderful because it's such a great resource for that. And I remember at the, kind of the beginning stages, I was able to attend some Saturday workshops where you were put in groups with other people, same genre sometimes different genres, and you'd get to take scenes that either you felt good about or maybe you wanted some help with. And that was the first time I really had to kind of just with strangers say, okay, and read this, and just the feedback is just it's so positive and helpful, and it was fun for me to be able to give feedback to others as well. So, and I think the Guild has grown so much since I joined, so it's nice to know that in Central Oregon we have those resources out there.
Yeah, great, thank you for that. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. Our first one is for Jack. Jacqueline Hannah says, I read A Land Divided and I'm wanting to know if there will be a sequel.
Well, the best I can say is I certainly hope so. I could imagine my protagonist continuing on in another novel. It does require a considerable amount of self-discipline, and sometimes I can do it, sometimes I can't. But I think I have enough energy around this particular subject matter, nature, and how the relationship with humans, how we relate to nature. I think that it would be something that I would enjoy writing. So I think probably I'll be able to come up with the self-discipline. Thank you, Jack.
Nice. Let's see here. Erica, we do have another question for you. I believe this is this person's name, but I'm just going to say it. So the first name is Monet. I would like to know what Erica's next project will be.
Oh, I'm actually working on a prequel for Soldier On, which is about William's mother, which was kind of, her garden was mentioned in the passage that I read. And so it's about her. And so it's going back in time. It starts in about 1893, and I'm about halfway finished with it. So.
Excellent. Let's see here. We do have a couple more questions for Jack, but real quick, I want to pose one to Michelle. And this is simply because I have the knowledge. Are you writing another book?
I am. It's called The Dog Walkers, and it's a story about a woman who, after a troubling experience, self-quarantines herself. And the interesting thing is I started writing this in November before COVID.
Oh my
and as I was working on this, it was so interesting because the emotions I was feeling by being in a quarantine situation was so clear that it helped give me insight as to how she would feel. So it talks about what eventually helps get her back out into the land of reality and what she learns in the process.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you about that. So, Jack, we do have a couple more questions for you. Cindy Miller is wondering, what underlying message would you highlight for your A Land Divided readers?
Underlying message. You know, that's an interesting question. I think the central underlying message is that we, as humans, don't honor nature nearly as much as we should. and that, to be quite honest, it may come back to bite us. So I think that if it doesn't come out in this one, maybe it'll come out in the sequel. You know, I really would like to emphasize that. I think it's important that we honor nature, and I think that part came out. But I think recognizing that as humans we tend to go about our business, and nature is kind of a sidebar.
That's a great message. I don't know if anyone on this event was able to join us last weekend, but again, check on YouTube. Jack, if you're not familiar with this book, I think you might like it, but it's called Walking the High Desert by Ellen Waterston.
I think I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's about the Oregon Desert Trail, which is over in that section of, you know, it goes right by Malheur Wildlife Refuge. And you know, for me personally, as a Oregon native and a Bend native, I have to admit I have not spent a lot of time in that area of the state, and it sounds like I need to. So
I think it's fascinating. You know, it takes a little bit getting used to, but I think it's a fascinating part of the country. So
yeah.
I'm looking forward to ending up over in the Hawaii Canyon area.
Yeah.
As soon as I can. So I think that it's amazing.
Yeah. So we've got 2 more questions. Let's see here. This one's for Erica from Jen Healy. She says, as a writer and a teacher, how do you share your love of books and reading and writing with your students?
Oh, that's a good question. It's funny that that's asked because I read aloud to my students. It's my favorite time of the day. And I tend to pick books that are, I think, meaningful. I read a lot of historical fiction and I cry all the time. So tonight with this whole thing, and I was reading and I'm like, keep it together. And I say that to my class when I read books too. And they know in the beginning of the year, it kind of frightens them, freaks them out. They're like, what's wrong with her? By the end of the year, they're like, oh, here she goes again. But yeah, I love books. I love reading. I love writing. And it's fun to be a writer. And when I teach writing, tell them about the process, because kids, like, they'll take 15 minutes and they're like, I'm done. And I'm like, oh, when you think you're done, you've just begun. It took me 8 years. 8 years. So yeah, it's fun to share some life experience with them. I teach 3rd grade, by the way, for people who don't know. But
that's awesome. Let's see here. We've got 1 more question for Jack. It looks like, oh, this is from Steve. Is Professor Mack someone you know in real life?
So I'm going to actually answer 2 questions here as I see it. One from Brianne Wells, who I happen to know quite well, my daughter. Anyway, who was your favorite character to develop? I'm inclined to think that Professor Mack was my favorite character to develop. Just kind of a interesting, jolly character who was pretty smart and was able to work effectively with the other characters in a way that made what he had to say very interesting to them. So for Steve, I don't really know him. I know him now, obviously, because I created him. But I didn't know him at the time. I took, you know, in the creative process, in the imagination, I take bits and pieces of various people, combine them in the way that suits what I want to accomplish, and then my imagination takes over. I truly don't know what's going to happen with that character sometimes. So I didn't know him beforehand, but I know him now. Pretty cool character.
Well, that's great. Thank you, everybody, for being on this virtual event, our 3 authors, and so many participants tonight listening in. Again, this will be on the Roundabout Books YouTube channel. I'll try and get it up tonight, if not tomorrow. And we really, really do hope that we can have in-person events again in the store. We love our store space. We love our customers. We love our events, but we want to make sure that everybody is safe and healthy. So for right now, we'll continue with virtual. So we hope to see you again. We have another local author night on Friday, August 28th. So please join us for that. And again, if you want to get in touch with the store, our website is roundaboutbookshop.com, and the phone number is 541-306-6564. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your night. Have a great weekend. Happy reading. We'll see you soon.
Julie.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Great spending time with you.
You as well.